For decades, men and women in uniform have watched the impossible move across our skies.
Come back the other way, come back right, right hard.
Blinding light, impossible speed, movements that defy physics and reason. Objects tracked on radar, filmed by advanced targeting systems, confirmed by the eyes of trained professionals. And then, silence.
Russia had been doing the same thing that the United States had been doing, that is, secretly studying UFOs while publicly saying something completely different.
Reports buried, records classified, witnesses warned to forget what they saw.
My professional career deliberately obstructed. The American people have both the right and the responsibility to know the truth about unidentified aerial phenomena.
The truth hidden behind decades of secrecy, bureaucracy, and fear. But now, the silence is breaking.
A self-luminous, tic-tac-shaped object emerged from the ocean.
Eventually, it reappeared 200 feet over my house as it flies to me a triangle manifests around the light.
For the first time, decorated Navy officers, Air Force veterans, and Army personnel have testified under oath before Congress to say what they've seen. In the aftermath of World War II, when the smoke of global conflict began to clear, something else appeared in the skies. Mysterious lights, metallic discs, objects that defy gravity and explanation.
I was stationed at an Air Force base in Illinois as an Air Force photographer. On the afternoon of June 1st, 1951, I was very fortunate in taking a picture of an aerial object undoubtedly that of a flying saucer.
And out of these and scores of other incidents analyzed and checked by Life's science staff, the following proposition could be established. There actually have been and may now be present in the Earth's atmosphere strange aerial objects. Some are of a geometric order. Others can only be described as brilliant light sources. Their form cannot be determined. So far, science has not been able to explain them satisfactorily as natural phenomena.
Pilots called them Foo Fighters. Intelligence officers called them anomalies. And the public called them flying saucers. Across Air Force bases and radar stations, reports poured in. Some were easily dismissed. Weather balloons, atmospheric illusions, secret tests. But others lingered. Unknown, unresolved, unforgettable.
It had to be something of an alien spacecraft of some sort, because it was going so damn fast. I'd love to know what the hell it was, but I'm sure that we're going to discover aliens eventually.
The U.S. Air Force launched Project Sign, then Grudge, and finally, Project Blue Book.
Major Quintanilla, what are the objectives of Project Blue Book?
The objectives of the program are twofold. They're the same as they have been since 1953 when the regulation was written. First of all, to try to determine if the UFO phenomena presents a threat to the security of the United States. And second, to determine if the UFO phenomena exhibits any technological advances which could be turned into research and development.
The Air Force has been accused from time to time of hiding information about the UFO. What do you have to say to that, Colonel Patton?
Well, these charges are absolutely untrue.
There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
In 1952, radar screens over Washington, D.C. lit up with blips that no one could explain. Jets were scrambled. The nation's capital, briefly, went on alert. For a moment, the military faced a possibility it couldn't control. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. And by the end of the 1960s, the government had a new line. There was nothing to see, nothing to study, and nothing to fear. Project Blue Book closed in 1969. Publicly, the mystery ended. But behind the classified walls of intelligence agencies, the sky never stopped watching back.
Don't get him too close to me, please.
Now, ridicule has been a very unfortunate factor in this thing. I know, but what it boils down to, that anybody who reports one now, they'll say, you're crazy. And there are many people who have been badly hurt by official ridicule after sightings. The airline pilots today, most of them will not report a sighting publicly. Many pilots have told me that I wouldn't report one to the Air Force if the thing flew right in the cockpit.
For decades, silence replaced curiosity. Pilots were told to stay quiet. Radar tapes were buried under layers of secrecy. And anyone who asked questions risked their career, their credibility, or worse. The world moved on, but the phenomenon never did. Because in hangars and vaults, in satellite feeds and secure networks, the story was still unfolding, piece by piece. A pilot's video no one was supposed to see.
We see them electro-optically, we see them with radar, we see them as eyewitness reports.
Well, if there's a
A missile strike the Pentagon won't confirm, but can't deny. And a new generation of witnesses, ready to speak under oath. The official story was over, but the real one had just begun. For over a decade, ATIP operated in silence, a ghost program buried inside the Pentagon's labyrinth of special projects. Only a handful of people even knew its name, but secrets have a way of leaking. For half a century, the official record was empty, but the classified channels were never silent. By the early 2000s, the planet had become one enormous sensor. From orbit, satellites watched everything that moved. At sea, carrier strike groups scanned the horizon with phased array radar. In the air, advanced infrared targeting pods recorded at the limits of human perception. For the first time, our technology could see beyond imagination. And what it found didn't fit inside known physics. Objects accelerating from rest to hypersonic speed. No visible propulsion. No heat plume. No aerodynamic surfaces. And no explanation. What began as stray anomalies soon formed patterns. Intelligence analysts noticed recurring flight paths, coordinated swarms, and craft that seemed to anticipate interception. The data, according to ATIP and witness testimony, could not be dismissed as errors. It was persistent, measurable, and deeply classified. In 2007, the Department of Defense quietly authorized a program to study it. Hidden within a complex web of budget lines, its name was ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Its analysts studied the impossible in windowless rooms. Every discovery locked behind non-disclosure agreements measured in decades. Its purpose? To investigate these unknowns wherever they appeared, and to determine whether they represented advanced foreign technology or something even stranger. For years, ATIP's findings circulated only among a handful of cleared officials, until one day, fragments of its existence began to leak. The leaks could not be ignored, so the Pentagon did what it always does when the truth escapes. It changed the labels, reclassified the evidence, and called it transparency. December 16th, 2017. The New York Times publishes an article called Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's mysterious UFO program. It names ATIP for the first time and releases 3 Navy videos recorded between 2004 and 2015.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
Grainy, infrared, authentic.
This morning, the Pentagon is bracing for more questions about this secretive $22 million Pentagon program, which they acknowledged for the first time over the weekend to investigate UFOs. Among the questions, why they say they shut it down, what they could have potentially learned about visitors to our planet, and perhaps most importantly, would visitors come in peace?
Well, if there's like that thing, it's rotating.
For the first time, the U.S. military confirmed that these were real. No fabrication, no denial. Only the phrase, unidentified aerial phenomena. A new name, clean, bureaucratic, designed to sanitize what the word UFO could no longer contain. The world's most advanced defense systems had caught something no one could identify. When Commander David Fravor described the object he chased off the coast of California, his words matched the sensor data exactly. A craft without propulsion, accelerating instantaneously, vanishing without a trace.
It had no wings, so you think, okay, it's a helicopter. Well, there's no rotor wash in the water, there's no rotors, and when helicopters move side to side, they kind of slow and then they pick up speed going the other way. This was extremely abrupt, like a ping pong ball bouncing off a wall. It would hit and go the other way and change directions at will. And then the ability to hover over the water and then start a vertical climb from basically 0 up towards about 12,000 feet and then accelerate in less than 2 seconds and disappear is something I had never seen in my life.
And as each pilot spoke out, public perception began to shift. This was no longer science fiction. It was evidence from the military's own eyes and instruments. Inside the Pentagon, the leaks ignited chaos. Suddenly, a once obscure intelligence program had become front-page news. Congress demanded briefings. Lawmakers asked questions that hadn't been spoken in half a century. Who authorized these studies? What else had been recorded? And if the Navy had confirmed these 3 clips, how many more remained unseen? The Air Force, the Navy, and the intelligence community began forming new review groups. First, the UAP Task Force. Then, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group, the AOIMSG. Finally, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. Each promised transparency. Each quietly moved the data deeper into classified channels. Reports were stamped secret. Even elected officials required special clearances to read them. When summaries reached Congress, whole pages were blacked out, details hidden under the thick ink of national security.
Next week, Congress is going to hold the first hearing in 50 years on UFOs, UAPs. I was wondering if you just comment on that, since two people from U.S. military are going to be testifying there.
No, look, we're looking forward to the upcoming opportunity here to engage members of Congress on this very important matter. I'm not going to get ahead of that testimony, but we are absolutely committed to being as transparent as we can with the American people and with members of Congress.
The era of mockery was over, but what replaced it was far more unsettling. Because buried within those investigations, analysts began hearing whispers of craft recovery, of exotic materials, of private defense contractors holding technology not of any known origin. The dam had broken. Secrecy had protected national security for generations, but now it protected a mystery that no agency could fully own. The leaks had broken containment, and the story could no longer be contained behind classification stamps and redacted lines. Soon, senators would demand answers in open session. For the first time in modern history, Congress would ask in public what the government had been hiding all along. The doors opened. The cameras rolled. The government stayed quiet. The witnesses didn't. July 26, 2023. For the first time in over half a century, the United States Congress convened a public hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena. Inside the chamber, 3 witnesses sat beneath the glare of the lights, each sworn to tell what they had seen and what they knew the government allegedly would not say. This wasn't speculation from the fringe. These were military officers, aviators, and intelligence officials, people who had served inside the system that had kept the sky's greatest mystery hidden in plain sight. And as the hearing began, decades of silence began to fracture. Commander David Fravor described the Tic Tac craft off the California coast, a small white object that hovered, darted, and vanished in ways no known aircraft could replicate. Sensors and pilot experience aligned perfectly. Objects that had defied physics accelerated instantaneously and disappeared without a trace. There was no conventional explanation.
In closing, I would like to say that the Tic Tac object we engaged in 2004 was far superior to anything that we had on time, have today, or are looking to develop in the next 10 years. If we in fact have programs that possess this technology, it needs to have oversight from those people that the citizens of this great country elected in office to represent what is best for the United States and best for the citizens.
Lieutenant Ryan Graves reported patterns of repeated incursions along the East Coast. These weren't isolated anomalies. They were persistent, often tracking alongside military training flights, evading detection, and appearing in ways that suggested intelligence, intent, or technology far beyond what was publicly acknowledged.
We would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's 0 airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. These same objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, and they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
But the most unsettling testimony wasn't about lights in the sky. It was about what came after they fell. David Grush, an intelligence officer with access to compartmentalized programs, claimed the U.S. government had recovered craft and biological materials not of human origin. He spoke of reverse engineering programs operated in secret facilities, the existence of exotic materials, and highly classified projects unknown even to many within the government. He emphasized the gaps in knowledge. No single witness had access to the full picture, because the system itself had been designed to fragment information, enforce compartmentalization, and protect secrecy at all costs.
There were certain colleagues of mine that were brutally administratively attacked, and it actually makes me very upset.
That seems like a bizarre response.
I call it administrative terrorism. That's their quiver, their tool in the toolbox to silence people.
Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes, personally.
Anyone been murdered that you would think that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question.
2507 miles. Just medium and low.
I got the one over at right 4. Good, I lost the guy down here in the water. Okay, I got it. No, come back the other way. Come back right. Come back right. Right hard.
Grudge had revealed the architecture of secrecy, but he wasn't the first to confront it. Years earlier, another insider had tried to sound the alarm, not about what was hidden, but about how it was kept hidden. Luis Elizondo, former director of ATIP, described a culture of deliberate suppression, programs buried, findings hidden, reports redacted, and officials obstructing transparency, all to control the narrative, protect bureaucratic credibility, and limit public scrutiny. The picture that emerged was not of a single cover-up, but of a system, self-preserving, compartmentalized, and designed to ensure that no one person could ever see the entire truth. The witnesses revealed fragments, craft that defy known physics, patterns that suggest intelligence, recovered materials, and non-human biological samples. They spoke cautiously, but the implications were staggering. And yet, these revelations exposed another truth. The government's secrecy is its own force, shaping not only what the public sees, but what even its own leaders and scientists are allowed to know. These accounts hinted at a broader reality, one that reaches beyond the military, beyond Congress, and beyond public scrutiny. Private contractors, research labs, and programs operating in shadows may hold pieces of the same puzzle. The phenomenon is real. The evidence exists. But the full story is scattered, hidden, and tightly controlled. The dam has cracked, fragments have leaked, and the world has glimpsed only the edges of a secret that may stretch far wider than anyone dares to admit.
If you ask me, do I believe there's life in a universe that is so vast that it's hard for me to comprehend how big it is? My personal answer is yes.
In 2023, the narrative shifted. For the first time, a U.S. government agency, NASA itself, announced an official public investigation into unidentified anomalous phenomena. A study led not by intelligence officers or defense insiders, but by scientists. Their conclusion? The phenomena are real, measurable, and worthy of scientific scrutiny.
We are looking for signs of life, past and present. And it's in our DNA to explore and to ask why things are the way they are. In June of last year, NASA commissioned an independent study team to examine unidentified anomalous phenomena. We did so with a few goals in mind. First, to examine how NASA can use our expertise and instruments to study UAP from a scientific perspective. Second, shift the conversation about UAP from sensationalism to science. And to make sure that whatever we find or whatever we recommend, to make sure that information is shared transparently around the world.
The report called for transparency, for shared data, and for an end to the culture of secrecy that had defined the issue for generations. Yet, while NASA called for open science, those inside Congress began asking a more difficult question. If NASA can study this openly, why are so many of the nation's own programs still locked behind classified walls? 2 months later, the House Oversight Subcommittee convened once more. This time, the focus was transparency, and whether the truth about UAPs had been deliberately obscured, not only by agencies, but by the system that funds them. The hearing was titled Exposing the Truth. Its aim? To confront what witnesses said was a platform of overclassification and restricted access to data on the unknown. Luis Elizondo took his seat before the subcommittee. Elizondo described what he called a culture of obstruction and concealment. Reports buried, research restricted, and intelligence withheld even from oversight bodies, alleging that certain UAP-related programs operated outside normal review channels, shielded by contractors and compartmentalization. His warning was clear. Secrecy can protect technology, but it can also protect mistakes.
UAP are real. Advanced technologies not made by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe. Furthermore, the U.S. is in possession of UAP technologies, as are some of our adversaries. Although much of my government work on the UAP subject still remains classified, excessive secrecy has led to grave misdeeds against loyal civil servants, military personnel, and the public, all to hide the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos.
The 2024 hearing did not prove the extraordinary, but it revealed the extraordinary limits of what even Congress is permitted to see. The cameras turned off, but the questions stayed lit. If secrecy protects knowledge, who decides what remains hidden? And if the truth lies beyond government walls, who exactly is keeping it now? For decades, classified research didn't just vanish. It allegedly changed hands. Government secrets became intellectual property, and the truth, whatever it was, became proprietary. Aerospace giants, intelligence subcontractors, and think tanks began to appear in the trails of programs once run by the Pentagon. Projects described only in code words, buried inside routine research budgets. Each one a closed loop of secrecy, protected by need to know. Some insiders, as David Grutch testified under oath, called it the invisible industry, a network of private enterprises allegedly carrying on the legacy of the government's deepest programs. Under contract, beyond oversight, shielded from freedom of information requests. Grutch described fragments of unusual materials, metals that behaved in ways conventional alloys never should. Others recalled labs running tests with no official chain of custody, results shared only with a handful of initials. It wasn't proof, it was pattern, and the pattern suggested something larger. Secrecy itself had evolved from locked drawers of the Cold War to the corporate firewalls of the 21st century. If the government no longer fully controls the secret, then who does? By 2025, the questions Grutch had raised would return to Capitol Hill. Under oath, witnesses stepped forward once again. Military personnel, intelligence officers, and specialists. And the dam that secrecy had held for decades couldn't contain the flow any longer. Each had seen something they could not explain. Each had been told not to speak. And each had decided that silence was no longer an act of loyalty, but complicity. Before the uniforms came, the journalist, a man who had been chasing the shadow for decades, George Knapp. He spoke not as a soldier, but as someone who had followed the paper trails and the cover-ups.
Good morning, Chairwoman Luna, Ranking Member, Ms. Crockett, and members of the task force. And Dina Titus, I just knew we were going to get you involved in this topic at one point. Great to see you here. I'm George Knapp, Chief Investigative Reporter at KLES TV in Las Vegas. I began my pursuit of this weird mystery way back in 1987, and for 38 years, I've always approached this as a news story. It's not a matter of faith or belief. To me, it's a story, and it's an important one. I'm proud to be here alongside these witnesses today, men who have seen strange things and stepped forward to tell the world about it.
He described what he'd uncovered during Russia's Glasnost era in the early 1990s, when for a brief moment, the veil of secrecy on both sides of the Iron Curtain thinned. Knapp met with Soviet defense scientists and officers who revealed that their government had once maintained a vast UAP study program. It cataloged encounters near nuclear bases and missile silos, objects that appeared without warning on radar, and in several cases, triggered automatic nuclear responses before vanishing from the screens. Had manual intervention not stopped the systems, the world might have faced a nuclear exchange born from a misread signal, not an act of war.
I got into Russia, met with a number of their defense officials, Ministry of Defense and others, who confirmed for me that Russia had been doing the same thing that the United States had been doing, that is, secretly studying UFOs while publicly saying something completely different. The documents and interviews that I obtained and have now shared with this task force show that the USSR launched what is almost certainly the largest UFO-UAP investigation in the world. I met with these officials who, during that time period, Glasnost, Perestroika, the Russians were trying to open up to the world, and I saw it as a window of opportunity, and it was. And we were able to talk these folks into providing us information that otherwise we would never have seen. Some of that was classified. I found out that they only stamped the top pages of these documents that were classified, so I just removed them. I removed those pages and I carried them back. And if they caught me, I'd be in a gulag still. Yeah. Nikolai Kapranov, the physicist friend of mine, said, look, if this had happened 5 years earlier, we would be in prison. If it had happened 10 years earlier, we would have been shot.
He did not claim to know what those objects were, only that the pattern, radar interference, nuclear proximity, and intense secrecy was unmistakable. If Russia had experienced this, the United States almost certainly would have too. In every great technological contest, the bomb, the missile, the moon, neither superpower had ever allowed the other to reach understanding first. Knapp reminded us that this was not a story isolated to one nation, but a pattern observed across decades, a shared struggle to understand what could not yet be explained.
But in the years since then, I've interviewed dozens of other people, and I've detailed what their testimony has been in the written statement. They include Senator Harry Reid, Senator Howard Cannon, also of Nevada, a guy named Al O'Donnell, who was the first general manager of EG&G in Nevada, which managed the Nevada test site, which blew up hundreds of nuclear weapons. There's a guy named Dr. James Lakatsky, who was a career scientist with the Defense Intelligence Agency, who was the guy who initiated a program called OSAP, Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, which is, as far as we know, the largest acknowledged UFO program ever funded by the US government, which put together an amazing pile of information that members of this committee and the world, most of which have never seen. It's been widely reported and suspected that Lockheed Martin is one of the contractors, the defense contractors, that has held this stuff, stored it away in secrecy, and tried to figure out how it works. I have confirmed on the record that Robert Bigelow and a trusted colleague from OSAP met with and negotiated with senior executives at Lockheed Martin and hammered out a deal wherein Bigelow's company, Bass, would receive a quantity of unusual material that had been stashed away and protected at a facility in California. That material was not made here.
Knapp's testimony didn't prove Grush's claims, but it revealed that the obsession with secrecy and the fear of falling behind transcended borders. Each side had glimpsed something it couldn't explain, and both had chosen silence over risk. Then came Jeffrey Nusatelli, a former Air Force military police officer.
I'm here today because the American people have both the right and the responsibility to know the truth about unidentified aerial phenomena. That truth remains hidden, classified and silenced by fear, retaliation, stigma, and confusion. Today, we are here to help break that silence.
The U.S. Air Force was born in the jet age, defined by control of the skies, by radar precision, by certainty in the unseen. Its entire identity rests on knowing what flies above.
What appears classic, open Californian countryside is actually peppered with antennae, listening posts, and tracking stations, the only signals to the outside world that on the other side of these hills lies Vandenberg Air Force Base, one of America's most sensitive military establishments.
Between 2003 and 2005, 5 UAP incidents occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base, home to the National Missile Defense Project.
2 decades earlier, at Vandenberg Air Force Base, he had seen something unexplainable. A craft, vast, silent, geometrically perfect, hovering above a missile defense site. No sound, no heat, no explanation. He didn't call it alien. He called it unaccounted for.
These facilities were vital, and they were repeatedly visited by UAP. Each incident was witnessed by multiple personnel, documented, investigated, and reported up the chain of command. A massive triangular craft, larger than a C-130, silently floating over the installation. I responded to the incident. Chaos ensued over the radio as the object approached rapidly. I heard my friends screaming, "It's coming right at us, it's coming right for us, and now it's right here." Moments later, I heard them say that it had shot off and was gone. About a week later, another patrol reported a light over the ocean, behaving erratically. Believing it might be an unannounced aircraft, they declared an emergency, and an armed response force responded. Before the forces could arrive, the object descended and either landed or hovered on our flight line, and then took off again at impossible speed. It traveled west and disappeared into the night. And then I had my own encounter, again in 2005. I was off duty, sitting in my backyard with 2 other police officers, when we noticed what first appeared to be a satellite in orbit, but it wasn't acting like a satellite. The light was strange, it was pulsing, and then it started to maneuver. It dropped in elevation, at times it would vanish from view and reappear in a different location in the sky, and eventually and reappeared 200 feet over my house with a 30-foot diameter sphere of light. My friends and I watched it for a moment, and then it gently accelerated and traveled up and disappeared into the stars.
He wasn't the first to see something extraordinary at a launch complex. But in the decades since the Cold War, such incidents had been erased, their records quietly expiring under the logic of routine archival policy. His testimony wasn't only about what he saw, but what happened after. Erased logs, lost records, and the quiet message that some incidents were never meant to exist on paper. Since that day in the Senate chamber, Nusatelli had pushed for one reform above all: a permanent record-keeping system for UAP events, protected from periodic destruction and overclassification. He argues it's not about belief, it's about data integrity. Silence wasn't security, it was negligence. Intelligence is supposed to be the lens through which the unknown becomes clear. For the U.S. Air Force, that lens was meant to reveal threats, not mysteries. Dylan Borland, a veteran intelligence specialist, told a different story. At Langley Air Force Base in 2012, he witnessed a black triangular craft rise silently into the sky.
And testified to both the ICIG and ARROW with direct first-hand knowledge of and experience with craft and technologies that are not ours and are reportedly operating without congressional oversight. Because of my direct knowledge of the reality of certain legacy UAP programs, my professional career was deliberately obstructed, and I have endured sustained reprisals from government agencies for over a decade. From 2011 to 2013, I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, conducting 24-hour operations via manned and unmanned aerial vehicles for Special Operations Forces in the global war on terror. During the summer of 2012, my team was on standby for weather, and I returned to my barracks on base, and at approximately 01:30, I saw an approximately 100-foot equilateral triangle take off from near the NASA hangar on the base. The craft interfered with my telephone, did not have any sound, and the material it was made of appeared fluid or dynamic. So on the base, I looked in the barracks, there was a little smoke pit outside. I was there on the telephone and looking across to the flight line, and I see a white light pop up and stop about 100 feet in the air. I thought it was a weather balloon. I've seen tests from there before, weak light, normal thing, not surprising. I actually finished my cigarette and I began walking up towards the flight line. There is a track, and because I was on 3 months of night work, I would walk the track at night when we were weathered down. And as I began walking towards the light, towards the flight line and the track, the light then flies across the base, across the flight line, and as it flies to me, a triangle manifests around the light.
He filed his report, and in the months that followed, his clearances began to vanish. He was reassigned, sidelined, and even silenced. He wasn't bitter. He was disappointed, because the system he had served, the one built to observe without bias, had refused to observe itself.
During this time, intelligence officers approached me in fear for their own careers, citing misconduct within these programs and similar retaliation that I was already enduring at this time. These issues include medical malpractice committed by Veterans Affairs staff, denial of work I performed while enlisted in the United States Air Force, forged or manipulated employment documents, workplace harassment, including colleagues being directed to not speak with me, manipulation of my security clearance by certain agencies, blocking, delaying, and ultimately removing my ability to be employed within the IC.
Every unit, you see anything strange in the sky, a craft, an orb, something unusual, you had to gather all the evidence, collect testimony from the witnesses, look for physical evidence, and all of that information went into one program at the Ministry of Defense. I know that one of the goals of the task force here is to figure out ways to protect whistleblowers and witnesses. And it's a tall order because so many of the things that happen to witnesses like these are extra legal. They're carried out by persons unknown, as Mr. Dave Grush, sitting up at the top of the room, knows all too well, including events in recent days.
The truth needs to be known.
The Navy's story has always been about navigation, finding order on a shifting surface, commanding the unknown depths. But Senior Chief Petty Officer Alexandra Wiggins describes something even the ocean couldn't explain.
Good morning, Chairwoman Luna, Ranking Member Crockett, and members of the task force and the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Alexandra Wiggins. I'm an active duty U.S. Navy Operations Specialist, Senior Chief Petty Officer. Father of three, a dedicated American testifying today in my personal capacity. The views I share are my own, and I do not represent the official positions of the Department of the Navy or any subordinate organization.
Aboard the USS Jackson in early 2023, he and his crew watched a luminous object emerge from the sea, linking up with three others before ascending silently into the clouds.
On the evening of February 15th, 2023, at approximately 19:15 PST, in the Whiskey 291 warning area off the coast of Southern California, I was serving on board USS Jackson. During that period, I moved between the Interior Communications Center, ICC-1, and the bridge wing, correlating the sensor picture with visual observations, part of my routine responsibilities for surface and air picture management. What our crew recorded was not consistent with conventional aircraft or drones as they appear on our system. A self-luminous, tic-tac shaped object emerged from the ocean before linking up with three other similar objects. The four then disappeared simultaneously with a high synchronized, near instantaneous acceleration. I observed no sonic boom and no conventional propulsion signatures. No exhaust plume, no control surface articulation on the Sapphire image system.
For over a century, the Navy had cataloged everything: wave height, bearing, wind, radar return. But in this case, the data was sealed away, labeled anomalous, and quietly forgotten. Wiggins called for a new kind of discipline, one that included the unexplained, not as fantasy, but as data worth defending.
That fact alone does not tell us what they are, but it does argue the systematic, stigma-free reporting and for the preservation of sensor data so analysts can evaluate safe and intelligence implications with rigor. That is, first and foremost, a safety issue. Standardized checklists and training should ensure we capture the best possible sensor data in real time, including IR settings, slant range, estimates, and bearing and range altitude snapshots, and immediate chain of custody for any recordings.
The final voice wore no uniform. Joe Spielberger, Senior Policy Counsel at the Project on Government Oversight, spoke for those who wanted to come forward but couldn't.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today about the importance of strengthening whistleblower protections, especially in the context of national security. I'm a Senior Policy Counsel at the Project on Government Oversight, a nonpartisan independent watchdog organization that investigates and exposes waste, corruption, abuse of power, and when the government fails to serve the public or silences those who report wrongdoing.
He told senators that the problem wasn't just sightings, it was systems. Systems designed to absorb information, classify it, and bury it under the weight of national security.
Congress relies on whistleblowers so that it can fully exercise its oversight and legislative authorities. It's understandable that former presidents of both parties have often taken a hostile approach toward whistleblowers. Their disclosures can embarrass the president and their political party or even lead to a national scandal. But whistleblowers continue to play a vital role during both Democratic and Republican administrations.
Whistleblowers were punished not for being wrong, but for being inconvenient. This wasn't about proof of the extraordinary, it was about trust in the ordinary. The expectation that government serves the people, even when the answers are uncomfortable. As the 2025 hearings drew to a close, the weight of the testimonies lingered. Not just stories of objects in the sky, but the broader question, what are we prepared to do when the unknown appears in our own airspace? The room had been filled with words, recollections, and sworn testimony. Pilots, intelligence officers, and oversight experts recounting events the Pentagon had hoped would be confined to silence. But testimony alone is abstract. It speaks of possibility. Now, for the first time, the abstract would become visible. In 2017, the Navy's infrared footage changed everything. Tic-tac, gimbal, go fast. Grainy glimpses that proved the unknown wasn't just a rumor, but radar. Back then, we observed, we tracked. Now, we engage. The hearing chamber fell silent as Congressman Eric Burleson took the floor. He wasn't introducing new testimony. He was presenting evidence from a whistleblower. A video stripped of all metadata, all unit markings, all identifying coordinates. A recording that had not been declassified nor commented on by the Pentagon. It had simply surfaced.
Tonight, new never-before-seen video off the coast of Yemen showing a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone tracking a glowing orb as it flies over the water.
The footage dated October 30th, 2024, appeared to show a Hellfire missile launch from a U.S. drone off the coast of Yemen. The target? A spherical object, a UAP. The missile impacts, then nothing. No definitive destruction. The object remains, apparently intact.
Does this video scare you guys?
Yes.
Wiggins?
Yes.
Yes.
A weapon designed to destroy armored targets struck a small object, and the object endured. What does that tell us about the limits of force, the assumptions behind rules of engagement, and the technology we're confronting? Why has this not been formally acknowledged? How many other such incidents remain hidden in vaults and servers? And if we've been firing at the unknown, what happens if it can fight back?
The documents from military and intelligence personnel behind closed doors admit that, quote, these things are real. They're not fictitious. They can fly in formation, they're evasive, and they outperform any aircraft known to exist, including ours.
For nearly a century, the unknown in our skies has been treated as a threat, a curiosity, or a taboo. Each generation pushed it back into the shadows, with classification stamps, ridicule, or silence. But the hearings changed that. For the first time in modern history, the question of what lies beyond our understanding wasn't whispered in corridors or dismissed with laughter. It was spoken under oath, in public, by those who had guarded the skies themselves. These hearings didn't confirm what the phenomena are. They confirmed that they exist, and that the people sworn to protect us have been seeing them, recording them, and questioning them for decades. The military witnesses, the intelligence officers, the scientists, each had seen only fragments, but together they began to form a picture, not of aliens or fiction, but of secrecy, the kind that thrives when oversight fails and truth becomes compartmentalized. Across the new world, new questions have taken root. What does national security mean in an age when the unknown is measurable, yet unexplained? What responsibility does a democracy have to its citizens when information that shapes our understanding of reality is hidden behind layers of clearance? These hearings didn't just open a file, they opened a dialogue. For whistleblowers who feared retaliation. For pilots who once laughed off what they saw. For scientists who can now study anomalies without risking their careers. Transparency doesn't weaken a nation. It strengthens it, because the truth, whatever it turns out to be, was never the enemy. Silence was. The era of denial may be ending, but the era of understanding has only just begun.